It started with a trail of footprints in the snow. Perfectly clear. Until they suddenly ended in the middle of a frozen lake. No cracks. No hole. No struggle. Just silence. For 15 months, everyone believed I was dead. Until one morning. I walked out of the woods alive, wearing someone else's clothes. With no memory of where I'd been. But the strangest part wasn't that I came back. It was what I felt the moment I realized how much time I'd lost. My name is Steven Kubacki, and before my disappearance became a headline, I was just another student trying to survive exams, cold winters, and the quiet pressure of figuring out who I was supposed to become. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't chasing danger or mystery. I liked the cold, the silence, the feeling of being alone with my thoughts. That's why I went skiing along Lake Michigan that weekend, to clear my head, not to vanish. I packed my gear like I always did: extra gloves, wool socks, a thermos of cheap coffee, and a folded map I'd memorized long before I even stepped outside. When I locked my dorm room door that afternoon, I wasn't walking toward the unknown. I wasn't walking toward a 15-month blackout. I was just a 23-year-old kid who needed a break. And yet, that ordinary decision, that simple winter trip, would become the moment the world stopped knowing where I ended and something else began. The morning I left felt normal, quiet, cold, predictable. I loaded my skis into the car, breathed in the frozen air, and told myself this trip would clear my mind. The drive north was familiar. Snow-blurred trees leaned over the road like they were listening, and the sky hung low and heavy, the way it always does before a storm. I stopped in a small town for gas. Bought a candy bar and a lighter I didn't need. The clerk barely glanced at me, and that was the last person to see me as a normal man living a normal day. By the time I reached the lake, daylight was fading. Winter doesn't wait for anyone. The wind coming off the water felt like it could carve through bone, but I clipped into my skis and started moving anyway. For a while, it was perfect: the steady rhythm of sliding over snow, the cold burning my lungs, the silence settling into my mind like fresh powder. I remember thinking, this is exactly what I needed. What I don't remember is ever deciding to stop. People later told me the story of my own disappearance as if it were some campfire legend whispered to scare children. My skis were found standing in the snow, abandoned mid-journey. My backpack lay nearby, half unzipped, as if I'd stepped out of my life with no intention of coming back. Rescuers followed my footprints. At first, they were clear, deep, steady strides heading toward the lake. No stumble. No hesitation. Whoever made those prints was calm. Confident. Purposeful. The tracks continued straight onto the frozen water. Not once did I pause. Not once did I test the ice. It was as if I trusted it completely. And then, they ended. Cleanly. Abruptly. In the middle of the lake. No break in the surface. No hole I could have fallen through. No struggle. No sign of panic. Just nothing. A human being had walked across the snow and then simply stopped existing. Those prints, the last physical proof of me, looked like a question carved into winter. And I don't remember making a single one of them. I've been told the search for me looked like a scene from a disaster film: helicopters sweeping across the shoreline, volunteers spreading through the dunes, dogs tracing the air for a scent that simply wasn't there. They dragged the lake for days. They drilled holes through the ice, dropped cameras into black, freezing water, waiting to see a flash of fabric. Or a body. But the lake gave them nothing. No torn clothing. No broken ice. No single piece of evidence that I had died there. just quiet water and miles of empty shoreline. For the rescuers, it didn't make sense. For my family, it was torture. Reports shifted from hopeful to resigned. He might have misjudged the ice. He may have slipped under. He's most likely drowned. Most likely. 2 words that let people stop looking. The search slowed. Then stopped. The world moved on without me. The snow melted, taking my footprints. And every trace of me. With it. I wasn't declared dead. But I wasn't alive either. I was something in between, a story without an ending. While I was gone, wherever gone truly was, my family lived in a silence I can't imagine. They didn't get closure. They didn't get a body. They got an empty space where their son should have been. They packed up my room. Folded my clothes. Held my letters like they were holding pieces of me. My parents tried to accept what everyone else believed, that I had slipped through the ice, sank into the dark, and simply didn't come back. But how do you mourn someone when you don't know where they are? People told them to heal. To move forward. To let go. But there is no letting go when the story doesn't have a final page. I've seen the old front page articles, my photograph printed grainy and pale, the captions written in that soft, cautious language people use when they're afraid to say the truth. Missing. Presumed drowned. Search suspended. My parents lived with those words. Every day. Every night. And somewhere, far from them, I existed in a blank space of time I still can't remember. I wasn't alive to them. I wasn't dead. I was a ghost with no place to haunt. When I finally came back, there was no dramatic awakening. No dream breaking open. No memory snapping into place. One moment there was nothing, a black, endless silence that felt like floating beneath frozen water. And then, breath. Cold air in my lungs. Wet earth under my hands. The taste of metal on my tongue. I opened my eyes to daylight filtering through branches, as if the world had been waiting for me to look up. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how I'd gotten there. I didn't know my own name. The only thing I understood was that I needed to stand. And walk. My legs felt steady, too steady. Not like someone who had been missing for 15 months. More like someone who had taken a nap and woken up a little disoriented. I wasn't injured. I wasn't starving. I wasn't frostbitten or bruised. My body felt fine. Normal. Unmarked. But my mind was hollow. I didn't recognize the clothes I was wearing. I didn't recognize the boots on my feet. I didn't recognize the backpack slung over my shoulder. None of it was mine. And as I took my first steps out of the trees, I felt something I still can't explain, as if I had just stepped back into a world that had gone on without me. And expected me to act like I'd never been gone at all. I must have walked for hours, though time felt strange, thick, stretched, silent. Every step felt both familiar and wrong, like my body remembered things my mind refused to. The forest around me was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. Eventually, the trees opened, and I saw the outline of a small house at the edge of a clearing. I didn't know who lived there. I didn't know if I should approach. But something inside me whispered, "Go to the door." I knocked once. Twice. Then the door opened, and a woman stared at me like she was looking at a ghost. It was my aunt. Her eyes filled instantly with tears, but not the kind you cry when you're happy. These were the kind you cry when the world suddenly becomes too unreal to process. "Steven," she whispered.
as if saying my name might break the moment. I didn't respond. I didn't have the strength to. I just stood there, unable to explain why I was wearing someone else's clothes or why I looked like I'd stepped out for 5 minutes instead of 15 months. She reached out, hesitant, trembling, and touched my arm like she needed to feel skin to prove I wasn't an illusion. "Where have you been?" she asked. And that was the first time I realized I had no idea how long I'd been gone. My aunt brought me inside, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and insisted I sit down even though I didn't feel cold. She kept staring at me in a way that made my skin prickle, like she was examining a puzzle piece she didn't remember losing. "Steven, do you know what day it is?" I shook my head. "It's been 15 months, she said quietly. "You disappeared last February." 15 months. The number didn't make sense. I tried to reach for memories, but all I found was a void, smooth, silent, empty. I didn't remember the cold. I didn't remember hunger. I didn't remember pain. I didn't remember living. I felt like I had blinked. And an entire year had slipped past me. She asked me where I had come from, but I couldn't answer. I didn't know the name of the forest behind me. I didn't know how far I'd walked. I didn't know what direction I'd come from. I didn't even know why I'd ended up at her house, only that something inside me had pointed me there. When the police arrived, they looked at me the same way she did, with disbelief and confusion mixed with something darker. Not fear of me. Fear of what might have been with me. At the hospital, doctors hovered around me like scientists studying a rare specimen. They checked my vitals. Strong. Normal. They examined my skin. No frostbite. No scars. No infections. No signs of prolonged outdoor exposure. They tested my reflexes. Quick. Precise. Almost. Too perfect. Then came the blood tests. I watched the nurses exchange looks. They tried to hide behind polite smiles. I wasn't malnourished. Not dehydrated. Not vitamin deficient. I didn't have the body of a man who had wandered forests, shelters, towns, or wilderness for 15 months. I had the body of someone who had been fed regularly, hydrated consistently, and cared for. Someone who had not struggled to survive. Every result contradicted the story people told about my disappearance. One doctor finally said, "Steven, you look like you've been gone for a weekend. Not over a year." But no one could explain the worst part. The gap in my memory wasn't fractured. It was seamless. A clean, uninterrupted blackout. As if someone had cut out a section of my life with surgical precision. And the more the doctors tried to find answers, the more I started to feel that maybe I wasn't meant to remember where I had been. They asked me about the clothes I was wearing: a heavy jacket, boots half a size too big, and a utility belt with pouches I didn't recognize. None of it was mine. The backpack was stranger. Inside were items that felt like fragments of a life I'd never lived, a folded map marked with circles around towns I'd never visited. Small tools, well kept, barely used. A notebook filled with symbols and short phrases in handwriting that wasn't mine. Every object felt deliberate. Chosen. Placed. But not by me. The officers kept asking, "Who gave you these? Where were you living? Who were you with?" I didn't have answers. I didn't even have guesses. When they asked if I had been kidnapped, held somewhere, kept by someone, I hesitated. Not because I remembered anything, but because some instinct deep inside me refused to accept the idea. I wasn't mistreated. I wasn't harmed. My body didn't feel like it had suffered. Something had happened to me, but it wasn't the kind of thing humans normally do to one another. At night in the hospital, I started having flashes. Not memories, not exactly. More like impressions. Cold air around me. Not winter cold, colder. A cold that felt like it came from inside my bones. A long hallway, narrow, dimly lit, with walls that weren't made from anything I could identify. A voice, soft, distant, speaking a language without words. And footsteps that weren't mine. I couldn't tell if these were dreams or fragments of something deeper, something my mind was trying to bury before it reached the surface. One flash hit me harder than the rest, walking. Always walking. Forward. 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 No hunger. No pain. No fatigue. Just movement. Like I was being guided by something unseen in the dark. When I tried to describe it, the doctor wrote down, dissociative episode. But I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe it. And neither did I. The theories started piling up before I even left the hospital. Police thought I had wandered for months, somehow surviving blizzards, storms, and hundreds of miles on foot without injury or shelter. Psychologists thought I'd had a breakdown, lost my identity, lived as someone else before regaining consciousness in those woods. But the math didn't work. My body didn't match the story. My mind didn't match the symptoms. And my instincts, the only real thing I had, told me none of their explanations were true. Then there were the items in the backpack, especially the notebook. Inside were sketches of symbols, patterns that repeated like codes, and small notes written in languages I didn't recognize but somehow understood in the moment I looked at them. Things like, follow the line until it breaks. Not the first door. Light does not fall the same way twice. The officers thought it was rambling. I thought it was instruction. Instruction for what? I still don't know. But every page felt like something I wasn't supposed to have brought back with me. As if part of wherever I'd been had followed me home. The more I tried to live normally again, the more fragments started slipping through the cracks. Not memories, but sensations. The feeling of being watched by something that didn't breathe. The echo of footsteps behind me when I was completely alone. The strange certainty that I had walked through places that did not exist on any map. Sometimes I'd wake up at night and my body would react before my mind caught up, heart racing, arms bracing, like I was preparing for something I couldn't name. And then there were the flashes. A shape in front of me, tall and narrow, blurred at the edges like heat rising off pavement. Lights, soft, white, pulsing, moving in patterns that felt intentional. A sound like metal bending underwater. And always, the sensation of moving forward through a space that didn't have walls but still felt enclosed. When I opened my eyes, my room looked wrong, too small, too flat, like my mind couldn't adjust to the geometry of normal life. People said it was trauma. Or stress. Or the brain trying to fill in missing time. But deep down, I knew these weren't inventions. These were things trying to force their way back in. As weeks passed, investigators started connecting my case to something far older than my disappearance. A corridor of missing persons along Lake Michigan's shoreline, a region people whispered about long before I walked into it. Some called it the Lake Michigan Triangle. Others blamed the storms, the ice, the unforgiving terrain. But there were stories, decades of them, people vanishing without a trace, footprints ending abruptly, boats found drifting without crews, lights seen over the water with no logical source. I had never believed any of it. Folklore. Coincidence. Bad weather and worse luck. But now, standing at the edge of my own blank year, the similarities felt impossible to ignore. Other people had walked into silence. Others had left behind impossible trails. Others had returned with gaps in their memories, or not returned at all. my case wasn't unique. I was just the one who came back.
Eventually, I forced myself to retrace my steps. Not because I wanted answers, but because the questions had started eating away at whatever life I was trying to rebuild. I went back to the shoreline where they found my skis. The air felt heavier there, like the cold had its own pulse. I walked the path where my footprints once led. I tried to imagine the version of me who had marched calmly across the ice without hesitation, without fear. But nothing sparked.
My memories stayed locked, silent, unreachable.
I stood at the point where my prints had ended.
Just empty space, hard ice, gray sky. But something inside me shifted. A pressure.
Like standing beside a closed door you know leads somewhere you aren't allowed to go.
I closed my eyes and for a split second I wasn't on the lake anymore. I was somewhere dim. Somewhere narrow.
Somewhere with no sound except my own heartbeat and a soft hum beneath my feet.
Then it was gone, ripped away before I could process it. I opened my eyes and the lake was silent again. Whatever happened out there. Whatever took me.
It wasn't finished with me.
Not yet.
In the months after my return, investigators kept trying to pull me back into the narrative they needed to believe. They wanted interviews, psych evaluations, follow-up statements, anything that could turn my disappearance into a clean, logical explanation. But every session felt wrong, like they were asking me to describe a dream I never had.
One investigator suggested hypnosis, said it might help unlock repressed trauma. The moment he said it, my entire body tightened. Not fear, instinct. A warning.
Something inside me whispered, "Do not let them dig."
I refused the hypnosis. I refused the memory retrieval. I refused the endless testing. At first politely. Then firmly. Then angrily. Because the truth was simple, I didn't want answers if they meant opening a door my mind had sealed shut for a reason. Eventually, the investigators stopped calling. Their curiosity dulled. Their theories dried up. But the look they gave me whenever we crossed paths in town. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't pity. It was caution. Like they knew there was something different about me even if they couldn't name it. Years passed. People expected me to fall apart, to lose myself, to spiral, to become trapped in the mystery of my own missing time. But I did the opposite. I finished school. I traveled. I studied languages, history, psychology, consciousness. I built a life ordinary on the outside, quiet on purpose. But the silence inside me never faded. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection and feel disconnected from it, like I was looking at a face borrowed from someone else. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and feel the air shift, a subtle pressure, a faint hum, a sensation of being observed by something just out of sight. I told no one. I kept the flashes to myself. The dreams. The symbols. The feeling of moving through a narrow corridor I still couldn't explain. People thought I was healed. I wasn't. I had just learned to live with the unanswered. The few times I agreed to speak publicly, I kept my story simple. I don't remember. I'm grateful to be alive. I don't dwell on the past. But when someone once asked if I believed I had died out there, I answered honestly, no. I don't think I died. The reporter smiled, expecting a joke or a comforting detail. Then I added, but I also don't think I was here. Their smile vanished. I didn't elaborate. I couldn't. How do you explain that you feel like you stepped out of reality and then stepped back in through a different door? How do you explain that sometimes, in the quiet moments, you feel like the world around you isn't the same one you left? That the angles feel off. The light falls differently. The air vibrates with a faint frequency you can't unhear. I don't claim the paranormal. I don't claim alien abduction. I don't claim anything supernatural. All I know is that I was gone.
And when I returned, the world felt familiar.
But not identical. Like someone had rebuilt it from memory. Almost right. Almost perfect. Almost.
As the years went on, the world built its own explanations for my disappearance. Some said I suffered a psychological break, a fugue state. Others insisted I was abducted by a person, a cult, or something far stranger.
Forums, documentaries, late-night theorists.
Everyone wanted my story to fit their idea of what happened.
But the truth is simpler and more unsettling.
My footprints, the ones left in the snow, were analyzed again decades later by specialists in search and rescue behavior.
And they noticed something others had missed. The stride length. The spacing. The pressure pattern. They said I didn't walk cautiously like someone testing the ice. I didn't hesitate. I didn't slow down.
I didn't shift my weight like a man afraid of falling through. I walked across that frozen lake like a person who knew nothing would happen to him.
Like someone with absolute certainty that the ice would hold. Like someone being led.
When I heard that, a chill ran down my spine, colder than anything I'd felt in those lost months.
Because they were right.
I didn't walk like a man afraid of the ice.
I walked like a man who wasn't alone. People ask me if I want my memories back.
If I want to know what happened in those 15 months.
Who I was with. Where I walked. What I saw.
But the truth is,
I don't. Some doors stay closed because we are not meant to understand what lies behind them.
Sometimes, at night, I feel something shift, a pressure in the air, a faint hum under the floor, like an echo of a place I can't describe but will never forget.
And in those moments, I feel watched. Not by a person. Not by a presence. By the silence itself.
The same silence that swallowed 15 months of my life. The same silence that let me walk across a frozen lake without fear.
The same silence that released me only when it chose to. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know where I went. I don't know why I came back.
But some part of me, the part that wakes up before my eyes open, the part that remembers things my mind refuses to, knows one thing with absolute certainty: whatever found me out there
isn't finished with me.
And someday, if it calls again, I don't know if I'll be able to resist walking toward it.